Welcome to podcast two. This podcast is, whoops, this podcast is me talking about indie comics, my journey into working with indie publishers before I started working for Marvel and DC Comics. And I'm thinking about if I do start doing these podcasts, it'll be random times. I'm not going to schedule it on a regular basis. Instead, I'm going to have it start around 8 o'clock my time, Pacific time, 8 o'clock my time. So New York time, that would be 11 o'clock New York time. Please subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and share. And check out my website. My website is waldenwongart.com. My Patreon is patreon.com/waldenwongart. And today I'm going to be inking while I work on this podcast. And this is a commission piece that I'm working on. And if any of you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them as well. So I'm going to be using a brush to start getting this commission piece done. Okay, I'm going to dip this in here. Okay, so working in comics, before I started working for Marvel and DC, I did work for indie comics. There was a lot of publishers out there, and I just didn't know what publishers to look for. But at the time, there was a magazine called Wizard Magazine, and with Wizard, they listed all the publishers that were making comics at the time. In the back of the magazine, there would be like this glossary that would list each of the publisher, the address, the phone number, and I would call them. Asking if they have samples for me to practice my inking work on, or I would email them, not email actually, just snail mail them, and ask them if they have samples for me to do some practice work on. So some of the independent publishers that I've worked on are let me list them off. The first one was Retrospect Comics. That publisher actually never made it into like big time. They did publish one book, Retrospect Comics. I think it's just called Retrospect Comics. It was published by a couple, husband and wife, John Flowers, Nina Flowers, and they were based in San Jose. I was in San Francisco, and they were in San Jose, which was about an hour drive for me from San Francisco to San Jose. I actually found their information when I was at a comic book store, and there was a flyer there asking, they were looking for a comic book artist, and I wanted to be an inker. So I just called them and then just say, come on down, we have a meeting. You can meet up some of the group members there. And at the time, I didn't really know how comic books work. So I thought, maybe this is like, instead of Marvel, there's this Retrospect Comics. So with Retrospect Comics, I drove down to San Jose and met up the two publishers. Actually, they've never published anything at the time. I think they were just did the call out, starting to look for people to draw the comics and write the comics. So I drove down there, and I actually went to their home, John Flowers and Nina Flowers' home. When I was there, I was greeted with a dog, and then John Flowers, and then Nina Flowers. I remember them. I remember going there very clearly because this was the first time I've actually encountered anything that was somewhat remotely related to working in the comic book industry. Now, given I did not know anything about working in comics, all I knew was I want to work in comics. And this was during that 1 year when I was trying to look for work. And if I didn't get work, I would just go and become like a bank manager thing. You have to listen to my first podcast in order to be filled in with the rest of them. So when I met Nina and John Flowers, they said they're going to be publishing a book for Retrospect Comics. And then they have a whole team of people. And it's an anthology that they're going to be working on, which showcases different art teams. And that was the time I met an artist. His name was John Flowers. No, actually, not John Flowers. I take it back. His name was Fred Reyes. Fred Reyes, he went on to work for and the animation company. He worked on Jackie Chan Adventures, some Hanna-Barbera cartoons and things like that. We kept in touch. I still talk to him every so often on social media. He's a good guy, and he was the artist that I was supposed to be inking. He would be penciling it, and then I would be inking his work. We did a few pages for the anthology. The anthology was like maybe 4 or 5 pages or something, and then we did the work, and it did get published after about maybe a year or so. At the time, the company, Retrospect Comics, they were they weren't just doing the comics; they were also trying to get a convention going on. And I remember the convention is Sheraton Hotel, located in San Francisco. Every time I drive down to San Jose from San Francisco, I would see that hotel, and it would remind me of running the convention over there. I guess they bought the rights to a local small convention, and running a convention, they would promote their comic book when it was coming out. So we went to every time there was a convention there. I think that we went to like 2 conventions. We would have a meeting, and then when we did have meetings, the publishers, John Flowers and Flowers, they actually rented a room in that same motel, which is pretty close to where they live, I believe. And we met there. And I remember meeting in a round table, a hotel's round table. And this is when I met like a bunch of artists and writers there. One of the writers, his name is Brad Cook, and I still keep in touch with him. He went on to work for Facebook, and then now he works for Twitch, I believe. Okay, he works for Twitch, and then he was one of the writers, and Fred Reyes was the penciler on the comic, and we all still get along. The other art teams, I didn't really get along. I mean, I didn't really meet them. I didn't really know who they were. I probably met them on the first time during that meeting, but otherwise, you only keep in touch with the group that you work with. It felt kind of like a group project in college or in high school, where you have your teacher breaks you out into teams, and then you do your own work, and then once you're done with your work, you turn everything in, and then you just get a grade. So we did the work, but I didn't know if we were ever. Hey, Princess Chameleon, what's up? Thank you for joining me here. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm thinking about doing more podcasts because these podcasts is fun, and it also helps me do my commission work. It forces me to sit here to do my work. So when I did the work, the publisher, Retrospect Comics, they never actually sent me comp copies, so I never actually knew when a book was published. Or we also were under we knew that we weren't going to get paid as long as we got our work out there. That was what was important to me. I don't know, maybe other publishers and writers, they got paid, but for me, I didn't get paid. And then that was the understanding. Like, I wasn't going to get paid. I was just going to do the work, get something published. And when something's published, I would have art under my belt. And that was okay for me during this time. Okay. And the reason I say that is because I've never had any comic book experience working in comics, or I've never done anything professional. So all I did was, during that time, I was working at the bank, wanting to be a comic book artist. So doing a gig that was going to get published was a big deal to me, even if I didn't get paid, because I was already getting paid working at the bank as a bank teller or a personal banker, and not getting paid was still okay because I still was able to pay the bills. So not knowing when the book was published, I would go to my weekly comic book store, the comic book store that I go to in San Francisco. They're not around anymore. It's called Comics in the Kind. Comics in the Kind was located on, believe it's like on Noriega Street and 26th Avenue in the Sunset District. That was one of the first comic book stores that I've ever been to. That was a comic book store. I mean, besides 7-Eleven and the Spinner Rack, or like a newspaper stand, the first comic book store, like a real comic book store, where instead of seeing a UPC logo on the comics, I would see like a Spider-Man's head or something, or a different image like Captain America or the DC Comics logo on the UPC logo area. So going to the comic book store each week, all of a sudden I would see on the comic book stand, the new comic book rack, there was this book called Retrospect Comics. Unlike all the other comic books that were being printed, the color comic books of Marvel and DC, all of a sudden you see this comic book that was looks like it was printed in a photocopy store. The cover was black and white. All the insides was black and white. It really looked like a just someone, like you're just making photocopies of your work in black and white and then putting it on the shelf and selling it. Yeah, it didn't have any glossy cover, or the inside wasn't any like a special newsprint or anything. It just looks like regular printer paper. Not only that, the size of the comic that was being printed for Retrospect Comic was almost like 8.5 by 11 size. So almost like a binder paper or a printer paper, if you will. So seeing that, I was like, wow, look, I'm a published artist now. I didn't get any comps or anything, complimentary copies, but I saw that and I didn't buy it, thinking that maybe later on in another meeting that I would meet the publisher, John Flowers, Nina Flowers of Retrospect Comics, and they would give me a copy. So I didn't buy that. Didn't buy that issue. So after the book was published, after that one book was published, Retrospect Comics, I tried to contact the publishers and they disbanded. After that first book that was out, after I found out that it was out, I tried to contact the publisher, John Flower, Nina Flowers, and there was no response. Not only that, I hear rumors that Nina Flowers and John Flowers, they're getting a divorce and they're not living there anymore. And that was the end of it. No more meetings, no more communications, lost touch completely. And that was it. That was my first published work. Never got paid, which was okay. And the comic book was in a different format, which was okay. But I felt like, okay, I'm a published comic book artist, except no one really knows about this comic. For all I know, that comic could have been like where the publisher just actually went into a photocopy store, printed like a whole bunch of them, and just started bringing it to some of the local comic book stores in the Bay Area and asked them, like, here's some comic books, just put in your store and sell it. And then, whatever profits you get to keep. So that was my first published work. Okay. Or I'll quote published work, quote fingers. Okay. And then after that, I was still continuing looking for work, more so sending my samples to different publishers. Among them was Antarctic Press. Antarctic Press was a publisher that publishes Ninja High School, Gold Digger, and like Warrior and Ariella, and some of the other characters that they created on their own. So they were in Wizard Magazine, and I called. And when I called, there was this guy. His name was Herb Millette. Herb Millette, I spoke to him, and I said, can you send me some samples? I wasn't actually looking for work. I was just calling them to see. Because, coming from school, I didn't think that you would have to send samples to get work. I thought like, hey, are you guys hiring? If you're hiring, I'm an inker. It was something like that. So I knew I had to send samples, but I also read on Wizard Magazine that if you're an artist and you want to submit work, it's always best to do inking samples or penciling samples based on their characters, because the publishers wants to see how you draw their characters, which totally makes sense to me. So I called pretty much all the phone numbers that I saw in the Wizard Magazine, all the independent publishers. But we'll talk about one publisher at a time, so you get to understand where I came from. So on Antarctic Press, spoke to Herb Millette and never met him in person, and just spoke to him on the phone. He was kind enough to send me some photocopies of some Antarctic stuff that they worked on. I mean, like photocopies of pencils that he was editing. He was the editor at the time. I still keep in touch with him on social media. You always remember the first editor that you work with. You always remember the first penciler that you work with. If you're a writer, you probably remember the first writer that you also work with. Okay, let's see. Hey Kai, how's it going? Good to see you here. Thanks for joining me. Nighthawk Warrior Comics. Nicely done, Mr. Walden. I will be watching these on replay tomorrow. Good night. Yeah, so I'm doing these podcasts, I'm going to start doing it at 8 o'clock, but different days depending on if I'm busy or if I'm available. So you can listen to the podcast. You don't even really need to watch me do the commissions. These commission pieces I can show. So I figure I might as well just do commissions and kind of create podcasts and talk about my journey as a comic book artist, going from point zero to where I am now. Okay. So meeting Herb Millet, actually, I've spoken to him and I sent samples. And after a few samples within months, I Herb called me and said, Walden, would you like to work on one of the comics with us? And the comic, I didn't really know any of Antarctic Press's comic book like titles that they worked on. And I said, yeah, I'll be more than, I'm excited. Like, I want to work on your comic book. And I knew that Antarctic Press published Ninja High School. I knew that for sure, but I didn't know what else they published. After I hung up the phone, the very next day, I was so excited. I went to the comic book store and bought Ninja High School because I knew Antarctic Press publishes Ninja High School. And I thought that I would be working on Ninja High School. It wasn't Ninja High School. So I get the FedEx package, and in the package was some original art that Pete Woods drew, and that is for a book called Shotgun Mary Shooting Gallery. I didn't know who Shotgun Mary Shooting Gallery was, and at the time I didn't really care because I'm getting work, and just so everyone knows, that page work was only $8 a page, very very little. And Artie Press later on also hired me to do a few more books, which was also $8 a page. But again, I didn't mind because I knew that this was a publisher that would print the books. Because when I went to comic book stores at the time, along with the Marvel DC section, they also had and they also have the Antarctic Press section. See, I'll answer questions as I'm doing this podcast. So this is almost like a interactive podcast for you guys. Sprawn to Brawl wrote, hey, Walden, by chance, you have part 1 available to view? Good stuff, man. I do have part 1 available to view. Part 1 is under my YouTube channel, same way where you're viewing this. But instead of, when you click on my channel, instead of clicking the videos, click on the live section. All my podcasts will be under the live section. So when you go to YouTube, there's like posts that you look at. You can look at videos. You can look at live. So I'm going to have all my podcasts under the live section. So when I got the artwork, I just started inking. It's a book called Herb Millet, and said I got the artwork. It was 8 pages. It wasn't too long. It was a little short story that Pete Woods wrote, and I'm gonna mention that Pete Woods was also the same penciler which I worked with later on over at Marvel on Deadpool comics. Okay, so if you're familiar with Pete's work, he also worked on Robin for DC Comics for a while, and right now I believe he's working on Meta Barons. He's a really nice guy. I met his whole family. Actually, I was one of his best men at his wedding. That's how close we got working together. Pete lives in Portland, Oregon, and I live in San Francisco. So one time he had a wedding. Oh, actually, let's dial that back. We'll talk about that at a future podcast. We should stay kind of in order of my direction and my journey, so we don't jump too far ahead. Okay, so I inked Pete Woods, and I didn't really know Pete Woods from who, and because this is a guy I've never heard of, but that's okay, because I'm working on a comic book, and this is gonna be paid, and then I'm just gonna consider this as practice, except that this practice is gonna be paid like $8 a page. Doesn't matter, it's still gonna pay me, and it will be published. So once the book was done, Shotgun Mary Shooting Gallery, I was so excited. The publisher, Antarctic Press, they sent me 25 of the same comic, which is called a comp copy. Let's see. Kai wrote, listening while I ink. If you're not working on commissions, you should try inking fan art or something on the podcast. Would be more interactive and make more people tune in. That's a good idea. Like I talk to kind of like what Dave Finch does. He would just create everything. But right now I'm just working on commissions. When I do work on Marvel stuff with these stuff, then I can't do podcasts on those because I can't really show the stuff that I'm working on. But since these are commissions, it's just like these are characters that the the client contacted me to ink. These are his own characters, so they're not like Marvel characters or DC characters. And by the way, these pencils are by Michael. Let's see, what's his name? Mike Bolden. Yeah, that's the pencil's name. I've actually also worked with Mike Bolden over on Wildstorm when he was drawing World of Warcraft, and I was inking over him. So in case you're wondering who this penciler is, it's Mike Bolden, and I've worked with him on World of Warcraft. So turning it back to NI Press, they sent me 25 of the same comic book, and I was so excited. And then during this time, you make friends with comic book companies, and I'm sorry, I'm not comic book companies, but with retailers. And I was buying comics from this guy that I met at a comic book convention. He doesn't have a retail store. His name was Sergio. If you're listening to this, hello. It's good to. It would thank you for letting me buy comic books from you. He was one of those comic book convention booth runners where he would sell new comic books, and I met him at the show, and I started buying comic books from him like quite a few times. And I asked him, "Do you take pre-orders from Previews?" Previews is a catalog that the comic book companies, not comic book companies, but the comic book distributors, they'll send to comic book stores, and people can order from them. And then I would order comics from Previews like 3 months in advance, and then when the book comes in, he will have it saved for me. Yeah, I remember the only reason I did that was because he would give me all the comics completely bagged and board. Because when I was buying at Comics of the Kind, if you wanted your comics book to be bagged and board, you have to pay extra for them. I think it was like 10 cents for a bag, and then another 10 cents for a board. So I have actually stopped buying comics from Comics of the Kind at this time, and started buying from like a independent, like a comic book convention seller person. So anyway, I got the 25 copies of Shock and Mary Shooting Gallery, and I was so excited. And this was before I knew anyone in the industry. The only person I knew that had something to do with comics was Sergio. I mean, aside from Arthur Adams, who also helped me along the way, but I'll talk about that at a future podcast. All of you are going to want to stay and tune into that one. That one's going to be a good podcast about the one with Arthur Adams. So when I got the comp copies, I called up Sergio. I said, well, "Hey, my first book printed. Did you get any?" He goes, "No, I didn't get any." You know what? Don't worry about it. If you didn't get any, I got you covered. I got 25. I'm going to give you 20 copies so you can sell it at conventions, and then you can keep the money. So I met up with him during my monthly buying comics, and I gave him 20 of Shock and Mary Shooting Gallery. Thinking back now, I should have kept them instead of giving all 20 of them away, because at the time I didn't really need 20 copies. But now I don't have any copies left for myself because I gave the copies that I have to like other people, like to publishers and editors. When I was trying to show my work around and to impress them, I would give the actual book that I worked on. Okay. So I gave it to Sergio. He was so excited. He started bagging it, and then he would go to conventions, and on his display rack, he would have that prominently displayed, so, which was exciting for me, like seeing my work on display at a comic book convention at a booth. So that was my first work with Shotgun. That was my first work with Antarctic Press, Shotgun Mary Shooting Gallery. And then after that, I got another project with Antarctic Press, and another and another. So they had me work on Shotgun Mary Shooting Gallery. After that, The next project was Warrior Nun Ariel. It was about this nun who has a sword that fights. And I remember the artist that I was working on with, the penciler's name is Art Lion, and his stuff was super penciled. Um, Shotgun Mary Shooting Gallery was a color comic book. I remember that. Okay, and then Warrior Nun Ariella was a black and white comic, and that book was so detailed. Inking Art Lion. It just took me longer to ink it. So while I was working my day job at Wells Fargo Bank, I would be inking Warrior and Ariella. I forget what the issue number was, but I did 2 issues for them. Okay, so it was 1 issue, and then I got to work on the other issue. I don't remember what the issue number. And both of them was inking over Art Lion. And you know what? I'm dialing it back a little bit. Both Shock and Mary Shooting Gallery, as well as the Warrior and Ariella, when I worked on uh, those those pages and sent it to the publisher, they never sent me the original art back. And you know, I didn't even know like original art was a thing at all. So I never actually asked them for it. It wasn't until like I started working for Marvel and DC that I knew that Marvel and DC they would send the original artwork back. But that's another story that we can talk about at a future podcast. So the artwork that I worked on, they would send me the Bristol board, and for Shock and Mirror Shooting Gallery, I was inking the actual Bristol board, but with the I believe Warrior and Ariella, the publisher Herb Millett asked me to ink on vellum. I don't know why he wanted me to ink that on vellum. It could be the request of the penciler, and not the publisher. So he asked me to ink on vellum. I had to go out and buy these tracing paper, and the tracing paper was let's see, and the tracing paper was just like literally tracing paper. You can either call it vellum or tracing paper. I went to the art store in San Francisco on Gary Street. That art store's not around anymore, and I just bought. I'm gonna come back and ink this later, and then I just bought like it's huge pad. That pad is so big. It was like 22 by 17 in size, and I had to cut down the size in order to get the right size to ink. To this day, that vellum was like, I think it was like maybe 30 sheets or something like that. To this day, I still have that pack because I never actually used all of it. You don't really like use that many vellum, or maybe I bought like 2 or 3 packs and I did a lot of sample pages, but I still have one left. So I inked Warrior and Ariella, and then after that, I worked on another issue, and both of those got printed. And again, they sent me 25 copies of each, which was nice. And then I have majority of them. I still have them. Not readily available. I don't know where it is. This is somewhere in the house, but I still have the comic book for that. So that was pretty good. And then Herb Millett, all this time I was still working with editor Herb Millett. He called me and said, Walden, would you like to work on Ninja High School? And I said, oh, yeah, of course, I would love to work in Ninja High School. Now, think of this. Ninja High School was Antarctic Press's X-Men. So if you think of Marvel, you think of X-Men, like the holy grail title of all the titles that Marvel produces. But over at Antarctic Press, it was Shock and Mary. No, I'm sorry. It was Ninja High School. And Ninja High School, I was inking over Ben Dunn. Ben Dunn is the creator of Ninja High School. So that was very exciting. I think it was a whole issue. And I remember the cover. I don't remember the issue number, but I remember the cover was like this red cover. And you see the girl from Ninja High School standing there. I didn't ink the cover. And I think Ben Dunn just did the cover himself. But I was able to ink over Ben Dunn. Okay, so that was about like 22 pages, I believe. And when that was done, they also sent me 25 copies of the same book. And that was the norm for the publishers at the time. They would send you 25 copies. I remember, fast forward later, when I was working for Marvel in DC, once you're done with the book, they would send you 25 copies. It wasn't until much later that Marvel decided to not send you 25 copies anymore and just send you 3. To this day, Marvel will only send you 3 complimentary copies if you did any work for them, unless you're like requested or buy it. I don't know how some artists get so many that they can sell at comic book conventions. Sometimes I go to comic book convention, I see these artists, they have like stacks and stacks of their own work. It could be maybe that they're buying their own books and then selling at a comic book convention. But for Marvel, all I got was maybe at most 3 copies. If not 3 copies, none. If they sell out, I'm not sell out. If they give it all out and don't have any more to give, then I would get none. Anyway, so back to Antarctic Press. So I did those see 2 Warrior Nuns, one Shock and Mary, and then Ninja High School. I think I also did another Shock. I did another Shock and Mary. I did. Okay, now that I remember. So I don't remember who the pencil was. That's kind of vague, like in my mind. So I don't really remember all the details on that one. I don't remember who worked on that one. What issue number? I do remember the cover, which was like this lady wearing, I guess, Shaq and Mary wearing glasses, and it's purple as a full figure. That was the cover. I didn't work on the cover. I worked on the interiors. So I also got copies of that. And that was it. That was it for Antarctic Press. I didn't get any more work, and it just stopped there. It could be because I was working on other stuff, but it wasn't like I was busy working on other stuff, and then they didn't have anything else to offer me. But I still kept in touch with Herb Millette, and then he would every so often he would say, "Oh, keep me in mind," or "I'll keep you in mind," and so forth. So that was Herb Millette. Later on, I would go to comic book conventions and meet up some of the different publishers and ask, and I would show my portfolio around. And I would meet another publisher. That publisher's name is called Delta Comics. See, you didn't know that I worked on. Let me read some of the questions so I can answer them. Hey, Comic Book Bob. Walden, have you thought about doing a collaboration video with someone like James Reyes or David Finch? Could be fun. Yeah, I thought about doing a collab video with some of the other YouTube artists out there, but I figure I'm gonna start doing this on my own first, and then if any of the other artists wants to collab with me, then I would be happy to collab with them. You don't even have to be like a famous YouTuber, as long as you have comics, and then maybe we can do something together. That would be interesting. But yes, that is all also on the back of my mind. Most of the videos I make is usually things that I have done by myself or that I'm able to do by myself. Trying to get collaborators is something that I'm thinking about doing in the future. So the answer is yes, I'm thinking about doing that. Thank you for asking that question. See, Kai, oh, I didn't know you worked on Warrior Nun. Yes, I worked on 2 issues of Warrior Nun. Did you ever show your parents when you first got your work published? I would feel so happy and show everyone I know. Yes, when I first got my first comic book published, I also showed my parents. That was when my parents started. I'm glad you asked this question because it's also important on how I became an artist. In the beginning, I wasn't. My parents didn't really want me to go into art. You know the phrase where, if you're an artist, you're a starving artist. You're not going to be able to support yourself. You're not going to be able to get work. All you're going to be doing is just like being a starving artist. And at the time, I remember my parents didn't want me to become a comic book artist. They don't even want me to do any jobs that was related to art because they didn't think that it would pay. And just like all parents out there, they want you to be either a doctor or a lawyer. That is so common these days. But I can tell you right now, for those of you who are listening to this video, and because I'm a professional artist for 20-something years, you can make a living being a comic book artist. There is a lot of work for all the artists that are interested in being a comic book artist. And I've was able to sustain myself as a comic book artist for 26 years. So there is work if you want it, bad enough. Okay, so when I first got the first issue of Shock and Mary Shooting Gallery, I showed my parents, and then they were so proud. Okay, so I'm Asian, I'm Chinese, but however, I was born in San Francisco, the United States, so I'm fluent in English. And then my parents, they would do this. They would get along with the friends, and they would do this game called MJ, mahjong. I don't know if you guys know what mahjong is. It's these little tiles that they will play, and it's kind of like you're playing blackjack or something. You're trying to match three tiles either in sequential order or all the same tiles. I know how to play it myself. I don't play frequently because that's not my thing. So Asian parents, the way Asian friends, especially those that are from overseas, when they come to America, and their way of hanging out or hang out with the friends is to play MJ. That's how they pass their time. So my parents would go play MJ mahjong. In Cantonese, it's called mahjong. They would play mahjong, and then they started bringing my comic books to mahjong to show off. Look, my son is an actual published artist. And I remember every so often, my parents' friends would come over, and then my mom would say, "Hey, Walden, can you bring out some of your comic books to show some of my friends, or maybe give them one?" And then I would give them books that I worked on that I got comp copies of. And this was way later when I got more comp copies from Marvel and DC. I remember giving out some of the Avengers United that I worked on, or Justice League of America that I worked on, and I gave it to like my mom's friend, like parents. They're not even kids. I don't. You know what? I don't even know why I gave it to them. They probably get it and then probably brought it back home and threw it away, or maybe what Asian parents do is like they'll rip out newspapers and then put the newspaper on the dining room setting, and then when they're eating food and they have bones, they would just spit the bones onto the newspaper print. My idea was like, I think they're using my comic book, ripping out pages and then using it to like put chicken bones on, or meat bones or whatever. Anyway, thinking back, I shouldn't give those to any of my parents. But like if your parents are proud of you and you see that they're proud and they ask you to give their friends a comic book, you might as well just give them a comic book. Okay. And yeah, so let me go back. So NRA Press, I worked for NRA Press, and later on, I started going to San Diego Comic Con. I think I went to two San Diego Comic Cons before I started getting work for Marvel and DC. So on the first San Diego Comic Con, I met up with this publisher called Delta Comics. Delta Comics, I went up to the booth and I asked, "Will you be kind enough to look at my inking portfolio? Because I would like to get a critique." And they would be nice enough to look at my work. And I believe the publisher's name was Ernest Cook. Yeah, he was Ernest Cook. And with him, he had the penciler. His name was Chris Meeks. Yeah. So all these names I'm mentioning is people that I worked with. You can actually find them on social media. Except for Ernest. Ernest has disappeared. Like, I don't know what he's done with all the artwork. Chris Meeks, I spoke to Chris a little while ago to see like what happened to him, and then he would like his wife would have contacts because they I think they both live near in the same city. That's how they knew each other. But they were like in Missouri or something like that, someplace in the East Coast. But I was the only person that was in the West Coast. I only met them at a comic book convention. So when I met them, I asked if they're interested in looking over my portfolio, and Ernest, he liked my work. And he immediately said, "Sure, how would you like inking this guy who was just sitting right there?" And I said, "Sure." And then he gave me some photocopies of some pencils, and I did some samples, and I was off to the races. I worked on 4 issues of Delta Comics, and the title of that book, let me see if I remember. I can't remember the name of the book. It's been so long. It was Delta Comics Inmates. That's what it's called. Yeah, I remember that book was called Inmates. And I remember when it came to the cover, he was nice enough to let me ink it, and he asked me, "Walden, if you know anyone who would that I can get a hold of to ink, like pencil the cover, you can ink it." And I said, "Sure." So one of the people that I got to pencil the cover, which I later on was able to ink, was Jeff Matsuda. Jeff Matsuda, at the time, he was working for Extreme Studios for Rob Liefeld, and he was working on Newman at the time. Okay, I think he was working on Newman, or maybe later on he moved on to working on X Factor. Yeah, he was actually working on X Factor. I remember meeting him at comic book conventions, and then I told him that I'm friends with Marlo Oquiza, who, if you listen to my first podcast, you'll hear his name. So I spoke to Jeff at the convention, and I said, "Oh, I know your Inca friend Marlo Quiza." Oh yeah, I know Marlo, and then we kept in touch. I remember meeting Jeff at a convention, WonderCon in Oakland, and I'm from San Francisco. From San Francisco to Oakland, it takes like maybe an hour drive across the Bay Bridge, and I met Jeff. He was there, and I said, "Would you happen to have any photocopies of your pencils that I can practice over?" Which he just pulled out his Marvel bag. I remember he had a little bag, like a shoulder bag that said a Marvel on it. I thought that was like so cool, seeing a Marvel bag like that. And then he pulls out some copies, and I said, "Oh, I've actually." He asked me like, "Have you done anything for it?" I said, "Yeah, I worked on Inmates." "Oh, do you have a copy of it?" And I did not bring any copies of it. I walked around later on after I spoke to Jeff Matsuda. I walked around the convention to see if any of the booths would have Inmates. None of the booths had Inmates because Inmates was a independent comic book, and not a lot of stores would order independent comic book at the time. Okay. So I said, I need to get like a copy of my book because I mentioned it to Jeff Matsuda, and then there's none. What am I going to do? So I quickly left the convention. After leaving the convention, I went to my car and I drove all the way back to San Francisco. Okay, because I want to go home and get that copy of Inmates #1 that I worked on and bring it back to Jeff. Now I left the convention at 1 o'clock, and then when I got back, it was like 4:30 or something. It took me that long to drive home and drive back. I went home. After going home, I found the comic book and immediately drove right back to the convention, WonderCon in Oakland. Okay, this was before WonderCon was moved to Anaheim. WonderCon used to be in Oakland, San Francisco. The only reason WonderCon went to Anaheim was because Moscone Center had some issues. Moscone Center was where the convention was held. That's the location of the convention center, and they had to like do some remodeling or something. So instead of WonderCon not having a convention, they decided to move 1 year over to Anaheim, and they did say that they were going to come back, but ever since they moved, they never came back to San Francisco. So San Francisco doesn't have a convention until recently. This past weekend, they had a convention called Fan Expo with a lot of artists there. I actually contacted the convention promoters and asked to be one of the artists to have a booth there. But I contacted them 2 years ago before they started the convention, which was last week, and also contacted them last year, but no response. The person I contacted was Kevin something. I don't really remember his name, and he even responded back to me. He said, "Oh, just send your information here, and then once you get it, we'll set you up with a booth." But they never actually set me up with a booth. I didn't even need a hotel, or I didn't need any transportation or anything like that. I didn't need to fly. I was actually in San Francisco. It actually takes me like about 20 minutes to drive there, so it wasn't too far for me, but I didn't go. Anyway, in the convention, I drove home, got the comic book, and gave it to Jeff Matsuda. That's how we started. I started keeping in touch with Jeff Matsuda. Jeff Matsuda was in the same studio with Marlo Oquiza at Extreme Studios and Rob Liefeld's comic book publishing company. And when I would call Marlo Oquiza, I would also ask about Jeff. Later on, they did a signing, and I also met Jeff along the way. I remember one of the first signings I ever been to was at Crazy Cat Comics in Los Angeles. We had a friend, Harvey Yane, and he asked if I would like to do a signing at the comic book store, because at the same time when I was working on these independent comic books, I was also working on DC Comics and Marvel Comics. So even though I was doing Marvel and DC, I was still working on indie comics. The pay structure for each publisher was different, but that didn't matter to me because all I wanted was to get my work published out there. Snart, hello Snart, thank you for joining me here. So I got to know Jeff by going to conventions, and we spoke. I remember going to that signing at Anaheim. I remember that convention was inside in this famous place. Like you walk in, you see this big gorilla billboard, and in there there's like another comic book store, things from another world. That place, I don't know what that. It was always like a shopping mall. We did a signing over there. I remember when I left, Jeff Masuda asked me to stay an extra day, and then the pencil who I was working with, Marlo Aquiza, over on Justice League of America, he said, "Yeah, you can stay another day." And Marlo was asking me to stay, and there was a whole bunch of other good artists there. So the first signing I did, there was Norm Ratmoon. He was there. Norm Ratmoon and I were good friends right now. Danny Mickey was there. Jeff Matsuda was there. Mark Pajarillo, he was there. Mark doesn't work in comics anymore. I think he does video games now. Marlo Aquiza was there. It was so great to see Marlo after seeing him at a signing, and then later on getting to see him in person after all he helped me. And John Sabal was there. John Sabal doesn't work. I think John Sabal still works in comics, not that often, but he does. He designs cars these days, like car designs these days. So when I was working with Delta Comics, he asked if I knew any artists, and I said, "Yeah, how about Jeff Matsuda? I can give him a call, and maybe he can pencil a cover, and I can ink it." Sure. And then we got Jeff said yes. I don't know what the pay structure Jeff got, but that was negotiated between Ernest Cook, the publisher of Delta Comics, and Jeff Matsuda. Okay, so after Jeff penciled the artwork, he sent it to me directly, and I inked it. And after I inked it, I sent it to Ernest Cook, the publisher of Delta Comics, and he made that into issue 3 of Inmates. Yeah, now the more I'm talking about, the more I'm remembering the name of the comic. The name of the comic was called Inmates, Prisoners of Society. You may be able to find some of that out there because he printed a lot of them. Every so often, I'll see that book on eBay or maybe at mycomicshop.com and so forth. It does pop up every so often. I don't really see people bringing that up to me to sign. Once in a while, I do see fans or collectors bringing that book for me to sign, and I'm like, wow, you follow my work way back. So that's really nice to see. Or if they even brought a Shock and Mary Shooting Gallery, one of the first book I worked on, to sign. That does happen. Working in comic books for so long. So we got Jeff Matsuda to do issue 3, and then Ernest was like, wow, I can't believe you got the X Factor artist to pencil our cover. Do you know anyone else that may be interested in working on a cover for issue 4? And I go, oh, let me call one of the persons that helped me along the way. I can call Arthur Adams. And he goes, what? You know Arthur Adams? Yeah, I knew him way before I even started working in comics. He's a good friend. And so I contacted Arthur Adams, and I said, hey, Arthur, would you be interested in doing the covers? He goes, sure, give me more details. And then I just put him in touch with Ernest Cook of Delta Comics. So Arthur, he penciled, and actually, he didn't pencil in issue 4. I take that back. Let's rewind back before Arthur Adams. I contacted Pete Woods. Pete Woods worked on issue 4, either 3 or 4, one of the number. Either Jeff did 3 or either Pete Woods did 3. He did the cover because I worked with him on Shock and Mary Shooting Gallery and also Deadpool at the time. And he did the cover and I penciled. After he penciled the cover and I inked. After that was done, Ernest was like, wow, you're on a roll. You got the Deadpool artist to do our cover. Do you know anyone else? And I thought, yeah, I know. So, I know Arthur Adams. So I contacted Arthur. Arthur drew an issue 0 cover. Okay, so all that, they just negotiated, talked about that, and so forth. Okay, there's a whole drama with that too. So I'll tell you about the drama as well. When that book was printed, I remember meeting up with author at another convention, and he said, "Hey, Walden, when you work for Ernest Cook, do you get your do you get your original art back?" And I go, You know what? That's a good question. He never sent me an original art. Why do you ask?" He goes, "Yeah, because I want my original art cover back for issue." For the issue 0 of the cover I did for him because I want to sell it. He's not giving it back. And I go, "Oh, really? Let me talk to Ernest and find out why he's not giving it back to you. He should give it back to you if you're supposed to get it back. You should get it back." So I called Ernest Cook and I said, "Hey, Ernest, my friend Arthur said he worked on the cover. Can you send it back to him?" And then Ernest said, "I why should I send it back? I already paid him to draw it. So since I paid him, I should be able to keep the cover." And I said, "Oh no, I think you're supposed to return the cover. Like when we do work for Marvel and DC, if the artist worked on the cover, they would get the cover back. If they worked on the interiors, they would get the interiors back. So you should return the artwork back to Arthur Adams." And he goes, "No, I paid him for it, so I feel like it's mine, so I own it. So I'm not going to pay him back." And I go, "Well, you should talk to Arthur and talk to him about it because he's expecting you to give him back." So after I got off the phone with Ernest, I told Arthur saying that he's refusing to pay. So hopefully, maybe you guys can negotiate something because I didn't know that like he wasn't gonna give the artwork back. He's supposed to, but he didn't. That's why recently, maybe a year ago, I spoke to Chris Meeks, the person who I inked over on Delta Comics cross Delta Comics Inmates Prisoner Society. I asked him, "Hey, do you still keep in touch with Ernest Cook?" And he said, "No, he's not doing comic books anymore." And I asked the penciler, I said, did you get any of the artwork back? Because I would like some of the artwork back. Even to this day, we don't have the artwork. And he told me that the publisher kind of divorced the wife that he used to live with, and then there's a whole bunch of artwork there, but she doesn't know what artwork is what artwork. And I said, "You know what? If you hear anything, can you keep me posted about the artwork?" He goes, "Sure." But that was years ago, and there's no response. Hopefully, if ever that artwork of original art from Arthur Adams is returned and it comes back to me, I doubt that it will come back to me. There's like so many artwork that I've done that hasn't been returned back to me, and it's really hard to keep track of. But if it comes back, it would be great if Arthur can get that artwork back from Ernest Cook or Ernest Cook's ex-wife or whoever has the artwork. I don't know where the artwork is. I lost touch with them. I don't have the phone number or anything like that. So that was one of the other independent publishers that I work with. I was able to do a lot of work. I did 40 issues with them, and I also did cover work. And another publisher I worked with was, let me see if there's any questions. Another publisher I worked with was for London Night Studios. And some of you may already heard the story, but London Night Studios was someone I also contacted from Wizard Magazine, and I got a hold of them. And then the artist, Everett Hartsoe, called me. He was the actual guy that called me. He was working on Razor at the time. And I remember talking to some of my artist friends, and then they told me that one of my artist friends, his name is Steve Scott, we worked on New Warriors over at Marvel together. He worked on Razor for London Night Studios. Razor's owned by Everett Hartsoe. And he said, "Yeah, they're good. They pay, and then like you can trust them." So they originally said they were going to pay me a certain amount, like per page. And I said, "Great, working on the book." They sent me all the original art. After I got the original art, I did all the inking on top of it. And after it was inked, I sent it all back. I didn't send it in chunks. They were willing to wait. Like Marvel, sometimes they'll have you send, Marvel and DC, sometimes they'll have you send original art back to them for scanning and printing. They would have you send like 2 to 3 pages at a time. Marvel pencilers would, this is before scanning and blue lines, when we used to ink over original pencils. Marvel, the pencilers would send me original art like 2 or 3 pages at a time and as they go. So the FedEx charges does rack up. We would send stuff through via FedEx. So London Night, they decided to send me the whole issue through FedEx, just so they can save money on shipping. We when we do work on comics, most of the times everything was shipped in FedEx. Rarely does it get shipped in post office, or sometimes it will get shipped with what's that? DHL. That's another company. We don't use DHL anymore, but DHL. I remember having to drive to DHL headquarters down in San Francisco. That took me like so long just to drive there to get stuff shipped. But when it was better when it's FedEx, because there's FedEx ship stations everywhere. So I got the London Night Studios artwork and I started inking it, and I finished inking all 20 pages. And I called Ever Hartzell and say, hey, I'm done with all the pages. Great, send it over, and I'll pay you right after we get the artwork. He gets work, and I haven't heard from him in like maybe a couple weeks. And then all of a sudden, I called him and I said, "Hey, did you get the artwork? Are you gonna pay me?" And then he said, "Yeah, we got the artwork. It's absolutely horrendous. It's so bad we can't even print it. This is such a waste of my time. We shouldn't have hired you as an inker. Now we can't use this book anymore. This is like really bad work. We can't pay you for it." And I was just like, "Oh man, did I do something wrong? Is this that bad? Now he's paying me?" And I was kind of like in shock because, I thought I did a good job. But then he said it's really bad. Not only is it bad, he said he can't even print the work anymore because all the inks messed up the pencils. So okay, I'm sorry. I wish it would have been okay, but there's nothing I can do. Did you want me to ink it on photocopies of vellum over the pencil? And I'll do it again. I don't mind doing it again. And he said, nope, this is bad. We're not going to use you anymore. And that was the end of it. Okay, so for the longest time, I just believed that he never printed it, and the artwork was never used. The artwork wasn't even returned. If you didn't use the artwork, you should have just returned it. But I don't know what happened to the artwork, all the original art there. So those of you who are new to working in or like doesn't know how artwork returns for comic book is, when a publisher hires you to do artwork, the artwork that you supply is what they're paying for. They don't own the original art. You own the original art. Once you get paid to do the work, then the original art, it still belongs to you. If you work with an inker, then that artwork is split between the inker and the penciler. Inker would get 1/3, penciler would get 2/3. So that artwork from London Night Studios was never returned to me. None of it was returned to me, and that was it. So I would say for decades, I just believed that that book was never used and never printed, and that was the end of it. Fast forward, like maybe a decade later, I was at conventions. I believe it was at Heroes Con over in North Carolina, and then there's this collector who bought a whole bunch of comics for me to sign. So I was signing like stacks and stacks of comics, and I enjoy signing comics regardless of what kind of comics I worked on. Because the reason I enjoy it is because I get to see books that I worked on that I haven't seen since I started working on it. Okay, and among that stack of comics was a London Night comic book that I saw. I didn't recognize it because I did not know how the cover would look. I didn't work on the cover. I only worked on those interior pages that I did with Ever Hartzell. Okay, and I said, "Why is this here? I don't think I worked on this." I said to the collector. He goes, "Yeah, you did. Your name's in it." Really? So I opened up the book. I looked at it, and those were the artwork that I inked for London Night Studios for the publisher Ever Hartzell. That he told me that it was so bad that he couldn't use, and that he had to like get rid of it, and he couldn't pay me. So I looked through the whole issue, and I remember every page that I worked on, and I was in shock. Okay, I was in shock because he lied to me. He didn't pay me. He didn't give me any of the work back, and that was it. And he also printed the book, without he didn't even send me any comp copies. That's how bad that guy is. Okay, and this is the truth. I'm not making any of this up. Okay, so at this time, his company wasn't even in business anymore. Like he's probably doing like Kickstarters now. Every so often, I see him doing crowdfunding books with his name, and every time I see his name, I just have a sour taste in my mouth. It reminds him of the time he gave me that lecture saying my work is bad and it would never be used, and then he swindled me and printed my work and didn't pay me for it. That's my vision of Everhard Soul. Okay. Usually, I don't really talk bad about any other artists out there or any publishers, but that was really bad. That was really bad of the publisher. And so every time I see his stuff on crowdfundings or whatever, I'll read up on it and see what kind of artists that he's working with. And if I know the artist, I would want to like maybe warn them about what they did to me. Most of the other artists that he's worked with or colors or whoever, maybe he's still paying them, but what he's done to me was not something that should be done to any other artist out there. Because we spend hours on doing the work, and you turn around and not only do you steal the work from us and not pay us, but also give me a lecture saying that my work is bad. That is like that is that's the lowest of lows. Okay, that is like the baddest of bads. That's insult to injury. That's what that is. Okay, so that was Everhard Soul. That was one of the publishers I work with. Okay, now we're gonna talk about another publisher. The only sour taste I have in my mouth is just Everhard Soul and London Night Studios. Every other publisher I work with is a-okay. Everyone's good. I get along with everybody. I get along with everyone I work with. I become friends. I still keep in touch with people I work with from decades ago, from years ago, and so forth. So another publisher I got in touch with was this publisher called Indy Comics. Indy Comics. Before Indy Comics was called Indy Comics, they were called Parody Press. They would do parody comic books, like for example, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And they would actually make their own version called Radioactive Black Belt Hamsters or something. Parody comics. So later on, they started doing Entity Comics. It's like another brand, but it's still run by the same publisher, Don Chin. And he's a nice guy. He's one of the guys that I saw at the San Diego Comic Con. And I walked up to his booth and I said, "Can you look at my portfolio?" And he was kind enough to look at my portfolio. Not only did he look at my portfolio, he took one of my submission packs. And you know what? For those of you who are interested in how I do submission packs, I'm going to make another podcast, and I'm going to explain how I made submission packs from start to finish. So those of you who want to learn how to do that, stay tuned for future episodes of my podcast. So I met Don Chin, and Don Chin at the time, he was with Bill Moss. Bill Moss was sitting there. Bill Moss is the creator of Nero X, and he was just sitting there signing, and I showed my work to Don Chin. Don Chin liked it, and then he showed it to Bill Moss. Bill Moss was sitting right next to him, and both Bill Moss and Don Chin, they're great guys. I think it was just those two that was actually working for Entity Comics. Bill Moss was the artist, and Don Chin was the publisher. They do crowdfundings these days, and I'll look at it. I don't speak anything ill will of them. When they hired me, they told me that, Walden, we can have you work on Nero X. Would you be interested in working on Nero X? I said, sure. That's done. That's Bill Moss's character. So I'm more than excited to be working on it. So I inked it, turned in 22 pages, and it looks great. I even got to do the cover. I was so excited on working with that. And when the book was done, they sent me 20 copies, and I was happy. And then I asked, let's rewind it back a little bit, okay? I also worked on, with Indy Comics, I also worked on Stargate. And with Stargate, they did pay me. I think they paid me like very little, but it's okay because I was getting my work published. And the stuff that they were printing was sold in all comic book stores throughout the U.S. They were pretty big companies. So they had me work on Stargate. There was a 3-issue mini series of Stargate, and there was also a prestige format issue of Stargate. I don't remember the exact title of the Stargate. For the 3 issues of the Stargate, I worked on all the covers, all the interiors, and also worked on that prestige format. That was a very nice book. Sometimes you'll see like that the prestige format cover was the cover was, yeah, a photo of one of the characters in Stargate. Okay, and then after that, I also worked on Sandman. Matt Martin's Sandman. Matt Martin is the artist that worked on Sandman. For Stargate, I worked with penciler Leandro Ng. Leandro was actually a friend of mine that lived in San Francisco, and when they needed artists, we both started working. I think we both met Don Chin at the same time. Or no, I take it back. I started working with Don Chin, and they needed an artist. So I asked my penciler friend that I met working with another publisher if he was interested in working with. Oh yeah, that was another publisher, Diversity Comics. I gotta talk about that a little bit later. Okay, but let's finish up with Diversity Comics. Came before Stargate. So Leandro Ng, and I, we both worked on all 4 of the Stargates together. The Near X, I think I did 2 issues of Near X. I don't remember the issue number. That was inked over with Bill Moss. And 2 issues of, I think it was 2 issues of Snowman. It was Snowman 1994, that's the title. And then another one called Snowman. Let me see if there's any questions. Hey, Adam, admin, Adam and Adam. Okay, thank you for joining me here. I'm going to continue my podcast. Again, if any of you guys have questions, feel free to ask. This is more like a interactive podcast, so if you would need to ask questions, feel free. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue telling my stories of how I got into comics, my journey, and everything else in between. Okay, and so I was working on Snowman, and that was a nice book. Matt Martin, he's a really good artist. He was actually working on a book called Snowman, and it was about this huge monster snowman that was spiky and stuff. And he's a good inker. He's a really amazing inker, and he's a amazing artist. I actually worked on it because he was falling behind, and Don Chin, the publisher, was publishing his book, and that book needed to be printed on time, so they contacted me and asked me to help out a couple pages, which is pretty good. That was the first time I worked on a book that had variant covers. The variant covers were different covers, like a exclusive signed cover and a cover that was different. That was my first time being exposed to variant covers that I worked on Snowman. So the last book I worked on was Nera X. And when I finished that, Don Chin wasn't able to pay me. It wasn't. They paid a little bit more than an Arctic Press. I can't remember exactly how much, but it was still a little bit low side. But towards the end, that publisher was starting to get out of the business. They weren't going to print books anymore. So with Nera X, that was one of the last books. They're still publishing now, but now they're doing crowdfundings these days. But through Diamond and Previews, they weren't actually soliciting books for comic books to buy anymore, for comic book stores to buy anymore. So when Nera X came out, I asked Don, "Did you send a check yet?" And he goes, "No, I don't think I can. I don't think I can pay you, Walden. I'm sorry." And I go, "Oh, so what now then?" He goes, "What I can do is I can give you some of my Ernie Colin, the penciler. I have some original art that he did for Conan. Ernie Colin, is that his name? Gene Colin, that is his name. Hey Max, how's it going? So Gene Colin, he goes, Walden, I can give you some Gene Colin original art. Don't tell anyone. These pages are worth a lot. The Conan, and I thought to myself, I don't like Conan. I don't even know who this artist Gene Colan is. Why would I want that? Is there something else you can do? He goes, no, I can't afford to pay you. So I said, okay, how about this? Can you send me one of each of every comic book that you've ever printed, and we'll just call that as payment. And he goes, sure. And also, can you send me 200 of Nera X, the issue that I worked on that you couldn't pay me? He said, sure. So lo and behold, he kept up with his word. He couldn't pay me, but he was able to send me 200 copies of Nero X that I worked on. It came in this huge box. And I think I bit off more than I could chew. To this day, I wish I didn't ask him to send me 200, but he was able to print 200 of the same copy. And then I just had this huge box of, like the box is, imagine a, like a office moving box. That's how big the box was, all full of the same comic. And I thought, this is kind of cool. What am I gonna do with it? I don't know what to do. It's not like I'm a comic book store. I gave some to my comic book retailer friend, and he was selling it. But I have 200 of them. What am I gonna do with 200 of them? So I went to a comic book show. They invited me. I think it was like San Jose Comic Con, or I don't remember what the name is. I know the person who was running the show. His name is Steve Wyatt. Even today, he still runs comic book show, and then he every so often he will invite me to go to one of his shows. The next show I'm going to go to is like I think it's called, oh, I can't remember. It's coming up in January, March. I think it's Sacramento Comic Con or something like that. Anyway, Steve invited me to one of his conventions, and I went there. Oh yeah, it was called Big Wow Comic Con. That was what it's called. I remember now. So Big Wow Comic Con, I went there and I brought all my comics. I did not have a banner that shows my name is Walden. I didn't have any original art to sell. My goal going to go to that convention was to give away all these comics that I had. The Nero X, the 200 copies of Nero X that I have. I didn't go to the show to do sketches. I didn't go to the show to make money. I didn't go there to sell prints or sell comic books or sell original art. All of that comic book convention thing was new to me. I didn't know how to like work a comic convention. So I got there and started giving out copies of the book. And I would ask people, hey, come by my table, check out this book. Would you like one? And some people would say no, because they think that I was trying to sell them the book. I said, no, I'm giving it to you for free. Go, wow. Some of the people, I remember them saying, I hit the jackpot. Or like, that's very kind of you. So I just gave it away. Anyone that came, that looked at it, I would just give away, and I would sign it for free and just give it to them. So at the end of that convention, I did not have any more of the Nero X comics because I just gave it away. At the same time, let's go dialing it back. Don Chin, I also asked him to send me one of each of every comic book that he's ever printed. And I don't think he actually sent me one of each of everything, but maybe one of each of the majority of the comics that he probably still had laying around. Because remember, one of the books that he worked on was Docent Radioactive Black Belt Hamsters, which was a parody of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He didn't send me any of that. So he sent me a huge box of a lot of comics. In there was like Aster, there was like a lot of other ones. So I looked at it. Majority of those books were in black and white, which is okay. They had some variant covers, some die cut covers, and so forth. But I wasn't really into some of the comic books that were given to me. I kept a whole bunch of them, and then the rest of them, the majority, I would say maybe 3/4 of the box, I gave that to a family friend. I have a cousin who came with a friend that was a boy who was into comics, and I said, "Hey, Matthew," that was his name. "Would you like all these comic books?" He looked at it and said, "Yeah, good. They're all yours." And he looked like he hit the jackpot, like a whole bunch of comic books. Thinking back, I should have kept it so I can look at some of the works now. But it's okay. It doesn't matter. It's not like it's Superman or Batman or like anything important. I don't remember what I gave away. Okay, so that was another publisher. So Don Chen wasn't able to pay me, but he kept his word on sending me 200 copies of the book I worked on, and also sending me almost as many copies of the books that he printed. Okay, and then another publisher I worked for was a publisher called Liar Comics. Liar Comics, that was actually one of the bigger comic book publishers that made a name for themselves. Okay, they got so popular. I was thinking the work, and the penciler I was working with Steve Furco. Steve Furco was Mark Silvestri's colorist on The Darkness. Okay, Steve Furco did a lot of Top Cow work. And when I saw Matthew Scott and Sharon Scott, the publishers of Liar Comics, at a comic book convention, I showed them my portfolio. They liked it. and they showed it to Steve Furco, who was just a colorist at the time, but he wanted to branch out as a penciler, and they we started working together. They paid me like a little bit a lower amount, but Steve, being the professional that he was, he also took out money from his pocket and gave me to make up some of the to make up some of the loss in income. So in a way, he was like taking a pay cut in order to pay me to do the inking. He liked my inking. He enjoyed my inking. And when we were working on More Than Mortal for Liar Comics, we were actually making waves in the industry. Almost a lot of publishers and artists out there knew our work. Okay, I worked on 4 issues of More Than Mortal with Steve Furco. And during that time, Steve liked my work so much, he said, Walden, I remember going to comic book conventions and we were like rock stars. We signed books together. We were at the booth doing commissions together. We went at nighttime, we went back to the hotel and we had stacks and stacks of comic books that we worked on, an exclusive cover. And then both of us, we were literally on the floor signing comic books. All the comics, all the exclusive cover comics were placed on the floor, stacked neatly, like one on top of each other. And Steve and I would be on our knees signing every book. It took us maybe 3 hours to sign all the books that they had. I think the book was for American Entertainment at the time. It was like a comic book like a retailer, online retailer, one of the first online retailers. I think it was comic book American Entertainment. So we signed all the books, and then at this time I didn't even have a signature yet. I thought to myself, I better start developing a signature. So before I used to sign my name only Walden without the Wong. I would just sign my first name and not sign my last name. So if you find some of comics that only has my first name, that was before I figured out a signature. Both majority of the More Than Mortals that are signed out there, I only sign my first name and not my last name. Today, everything I sign with my first name. No, I'm sorry. Everything I sign today, I sign with both my first name and last name, and I've stuck with that for years. But More Than Mortal was a great comic book. It was a great experience. I remember meeting up some artists. I was later on. I met some other comic book artists, writers. One of the ones that I talked to was Jeff Loeb. Jeff Loeb, he's like a producer for some of the Marvel movies and Marvel TV show. But before that, he was also a writer for DC Comics, like Batman, The Long Halloween, Superman for all seasons. He's a writer there. And I remember seeing him at a convention, and I introduced myself, and I asked him, do you have a little bit free time to look at my inking work? My name is Walden. He goes, Walden? Are you Walden Wong? Aren't you working on More Than Mortal? And he knew my work right away. And ever since then, he remembers me. I haven't seen him in like decades. It's been a long time since I saw him. But back then, when I was going to San Diego Comic-Con regularly, I would see him and I would just shake hands and talk to him for a little bit and be on our way. Jeff Loeb was a really nice guy. So Jeff Loeb, he recognized my work, and then ever since then, he would say hi to me when I see him at conventions. But I don't know if he still remembers me now, because it has been a while since I've been back to San Diego Comic-Con. Okay, so when I was working on More Than Mortal, I was literally a rock star. I would go around the convention and show my portfolio to some of the other editors, Marvel and DC, and they would know my work. They would say, "Oh, you're Walden Wong from More Than Mortal," and I think what's happening was I was riding Steve Furco's coattails. Okay, Steve Furco was one of the best colorists in the business for Top Cow Entertainment, because he was coloring over Marks of History work. And Steve Furco, his name is Steve, Steve Furco, Firchow. So I remember the first time I worked with him, I thought his name was pronounced Steve Furchow, but it's actually Steve Furco. Okay. When I started working with him, he said, Walden, can you give me a portfolio. I work at Top Cow. I can send your stuff through the publishers, and then hopefully you'll get work doing some Top Cow work. And then the first editor I worked with over at Top Cow, her name was Sonia Im. And when she contacted me, she said, "Oh, Steve Furco gave me your submission packet and said you're a great inker. Do you have time to do some inking work for us?" And I remember the first inking work I did for Top Cow was a book called 9 Volt. 9 Volt for Top Cow. Later on, I did some more stuff like Witchblade. I also did some Weapon Zero and a few other Top Cow books. What became a full circle was when I was working on DC Comics JLA, Justice League of America, and at the same time I was working on some Witchblade. DC and Top Cow decided to do a joint comic book called JLA Witchblade. And on the cover, you would see the DC logo on this side, and you see the Top Cow logo on the other side. That was so awesome. That was like the biggest book that was being printed on comics at the time. JLA Witchblade. If you look for it, you can probably see it. And I was the inker who inked the whole book, including the cover. And in that book, those of you who don't know, because he did not get credit, Mark Parrillo was a penciler, and Mark Parrillo was a penciler, and he was falling behind. So he was at Top Cow working on Witchblade, and I was inking him on Witchblade. He asked Dave Finch, "Dave, can you help me out on a few pages of JOA Witchblade? I'm falling behind. I need help. It's due like the next day. I need to send the original art to Walden." Dave Finch, they were just sharing tables at the Top Cow studio. Dave Finch helped him out on a couple of pages. Not the whole page, mind you. He helped out on drawing a few figures. So Mark Parrillo would draw Wonder Woman holding Superman, and Wonder Woman was drawn by Mark Parrillo, and then Superman was drawn by Dave Finch. There was another splash page in that book, JLA Witchblade, where Wonder Woman was on top, and she's donning the Witchblade, wearing that Witchblade that from Top Cow's Witchblade, and underneath her was a Superman, and that Superman image was like a half splash page, and Superman this was like a vertical splash page, and Superman was all drawn by Dave Finch. I remember inking him, and I was trying to ink him like the way Matt Banning. Well, that was his inker at the time when they were working on an extension. I was trying to ink him like that, and I was so excited. And I remember talking to Mark Parrillo. I said, "Is Dave Finch gonna be like credited for this book?" Mark said, "I don't know. He was just helping me out as I was falling behind, but I'm going to ask our editor Dan Raspler to see if Dave Finch can get credited." And I said, "Yeah, it would be great if he gets credit, so people will know that I inked him, and I can show off like I inked Dave Finch." But when the book was printed, Dave Finch did not get credit for it. If you look in the book, you'll see Mark Parrillo as a penciler, and you'll see me as the inker. But later on, I was lucky enough to work with Dave Finch on another independent book for, what was it? I think it was called Harris Comics. Harris Comics was a company that printed Vampy. It's like not a Vampirella, but a Vampy, like a manga version of Vampirella. And they needed a cover with a manga version, a cover of Vampy, and they hired Dave Finch to pencil it, and then they had me ink it. So I have an actual ink cover out there that was printed. And not only did they use that for a cover, later on they decided to make that an omnibus. Dynamite, I think it was Dynamite Entertainment that later on took over. Yeah, or no publisher. But there is a Vampy Omnibus, which is like omnibus is a collection of a lot of different stories, like a huge book with different stories. And there you'll see my cover on the front, the omnibus cover, and then you see my name right underneath Dave Finch's name. Now, here's the interesting part. When that book was published from Harris Comics and from Omni Press, both publishers did not credit me inside the book. They did not list me as inking over Dave Finch on the cover. So in a way, it's kind of funny. But even though I sign my name on the cover, you will see my name signed right underneath Dave Finch, but on the inside credits, you won't see my name. So I didn't get credit for that. So it's kind of ironic. Like when Dave penciled something on Jelly Witchblade, he didn't get credit, but I got credit. And then later on, when we worked on that cover together, Dave Finch got credit, but I didn't get credit. But you'll see my signature on the cover. So I did work with Dave Finch a couple of times, but credit is not given for both the times that we worked on together. More Than Mortal was one of the publishers that we worked with, and we were like rock stars. Everything was popular. They later on continued with More Than Mortals. It was published through Lyra Comics, the own imprint. Later on, they moved over to Image, and they didn't use me anymore. They hired another artist called Alp. I don't know his name. They hired another. Steve Furco was still penciling it, but then they decided to not use me anymore because I was working with Marvel Comics and doing a lot of Marvel work. And Sharon Scott and Steve Scott decided to not use Walden, and they decided to hire Alp, which he did it. He's a good artist, but I don't know whatever happened. I just lost touch and didn't keep touch with that. I did ask Steve years later did I why did they stop using me? And then Steve told me that it was Sharon's decision. Sharon Scott. So I do remember Steve telling me that, but I don't know why they decided not to use me. So that was the end of that publisher, Lyra Comics. And let me see. I think there was another publisher that I worked with. Let me see if I can remember. Let me see if there's any questions. What are you drawing right now? Let's see. Music House, how's it going? Hey, Walden, I enjoy these podcasts. My question is, why do you dip that pen instead of filling with ink? That's a great question. So some of you are viewing this while I'm doing the podcast. This Agwash Pintel brush pen, you can fill it with ink, or you can fill it with water, but I don't fill it with ink or water. This was actually meant for watercolor pencilers where they actually watercolor pencil, where they draw in watercolor pencils. And then after finish drawing, they fill this with ink, they'll squeeze the water out and then make that watercolor pencil kind of look like watercolors. Or if you're a calligraphy artist, I bought this originally in Japantown. I mentioned this in previous video. Here's the original package. This was way I bought like a case of these before they start printing these in making these for the American market. I saw it in Japantown in San Francisco for calligraphy, and I thought, I'm going to give this a try. Ever since I bought this, I only bought one at the time, and I liked it. I went back to Japantown, San Francisco, and I bought the whole case. I cleared out the store 2 times. The first time when I discovered that it created a sharp tip, and then the second time because I wanted more of it. So I don't fill it with ink because I feel that if I dip it, there's more control of how much ink do I have here. A lot of artists and people, they think that you might as well just fill this with ink, but I don't want to fill it with ink. Okay, if I'll show you some of my older brushes that I've used. All of these I've never filled it with ink. Some of the ink will run in here, but I never fill it with ink because I feel that if I dip it, there's more control of how much ink in there. If you've ever used one of these brushes that has ink, like some of these other brush pens that comes pre-filled with ink, when you start inking, there's a chance that there's an overflow. When you're inking, a lot of ink comes out more than you need. So when I'm dipping it, I'm using it exactly as if I'm using a Winsor Newton or if I'm using a Raphael. I'm controlling how much ink is being applied to the brush like a regular brush. Not only that, a regular brush is so thin. Like the handle of a brush is so thin. Like say like this one, you're holding it, it's just a little harder. I like how this brush works because it's a bigger barrel and it doesn't hurt the hand. And sometimes when I'm making, I don't even really actually need this part of the brush. I've done this in previous videos and it threw some people off. I can actually just hold this and just ink it like that. Okay, so that is why I don't. Feel the brush because I feel like there's more control dipping it instead. Okay. And let me see what other publishers I worked with. I worked with a few. What are you drawing? So these are commission pieces that I've done. I don't know these characters. These characters were created by the client who commissioned me. They're not like superheroes or anything. They're like made up characters that he wants. I think this client wants to eventually make his own comic book company or something, and he and his brother developed all these characters when they were younger, and they hired Mike Bolin to pencil the piece, and then I'm inking it, and these are his characters. He There's a whole bunch. This commission, it's like a whole bunch. Like here we have this page, we have all these pages over here that needs to be inked, and then that's what gave me the idea of doing podcasts. I have so many commissions that are waiting for me that if I do podcasts, it forces me to do the commissions. So Liar Comics was another independent publisher that I worked on. Let me see if there'll. I know there's a few more. Yeah, I think was that it. Oh, I think that was probably it. That was all the independent publishers. And then when I was doing independent comic book work, I was also doing Marvel and DC at the same time. I wasn't one of those artists that would say, "Hey, I'm working for Marvel. I don't need to do independent work anymore. I'm working for DC. That's the end." Or I'm a Marvel artist. I'm not going to work for DC unless a publisher gives you an exclusive contract where you're only allowed to work for them. I was a freelance artist, and I didn't really have to be tied down. And just because one publisher pays more or another publisher pays less, like independent publisher always paid me less than what the bigger publishers pay. But for me, I enjoy the process of the work here, and those were all the steps that I've taken to do work. I remember, like I was doing stuff for Marvel and DC at the time, and I was still going to comic book conventions, and I would show independent publishers or bigger publishers, can you critique my work? Because being an artist, I didn't really have an art school that learns how to work in comics. So I remember going to some of the editors that works for DC, because they didn't really know that I was working on JLA at the time. JLA was the flagship title for DC Comics. I remember going to Paul Levitz, and I asked him, "Can I give a critique?" And he critiqued me, and he looked at my work, and he said, "You're not quite there. You probably have a few more years before you become a professional artist." I didn't have the heart to tell him that, excuse me, I'm already working on JLA already, title book that had Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, The Flash, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, all in there already. That's one of the books that you published. But I didn't have the heart to tell them. But a few publishers, they would tell me that I'm not ready, even though I was already working with the publishers. So when I was showing some of the editors, Marvel Comics and DC Comics, if I can critique, it was only because what I wanted was to get a critique. I didn't want to get work because I wanted to continue learning what everyone else thought of my work. Everyone has a different opinion of what they think is the right amount of inking and what the wrong amount of inking is. And I wanted to get as many critiques as I can. So this is today's drawing and today's podcast. Thank you for joining me here on today's podcast. I was able to fill out all of this commission right over here, all done with the brush. Right here. So if you enjoyed this podcast and also some of my other videos, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned for some of my other podcasts. Each podcast, I want to devote that to a different subject. And I want to kind of talk about my journey as a comic book artist. I have 20-something years of working in comics, so I have a lot of stories to tell. And I remember all the stories. So please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Please like, share. Check out my Patreon page. My Patreon page is right over here. This was podcast number 2, Draw with me. And it's Walden. My website is waldenwongart.com. My Patreon is patreon.com/waldenwongart. So check that out. And if you're looking for future podcasts, it's not going to be under the video section. It's going to be under the live section. So if you click on my YouTube channel, instead of clicking video, click on the live. Once you click live, all the podcasts will be there. So until next time, Okay, another thing is if I do podcasts, they're usually unannounced, but I plan to start my podcast around 8 o'clock. So if you want to join and tune in, just kind of be ready around 8 o'clock. If you don't see me log in on 8 o'clock, that means I'm not going to be in there. So thanks again. See you guys next time, and I hope you enjoy this podcast, and I hope to talk to you guys in the future. Take care. Bye-bye.